This is the world of company secretaries. On this channel, you can watch interviews with company secretaries across the world. Make sure you subscribe and hit that bell icon. So, here, what are the qualities do you think as a student that people can start learning and skilling themselves? You can talk about 3 or 4 qualities and skills which is required to be a good company secretary or a good professional.
Yeah, look. Let me just talk about before I get to the part on CA, being a good CS and what skills it takes. Let me just talk a little bit about student life and some things that held me in good stead.
Yes.
One of the things that I always say is on planning, and I want to share one anecdote here. In one of the companies, our managing director used to say that the future is so uncertain. What is the point of planning? He would ask all of us, right? Do you think planning is important? Anyway, what's going to happen in the future, you cannot predict, right? And all of us would look at him and be a little puzzled. And then he would say that the future is uncertain. That's why you plan. And it's not that because there's no use of planning because the future is uncertain. It's the other way around. So you plan because the future is uncertain, and that holds for any student in any stage of life. Have a game plan, have a plan A, have a plan B, and this can be in your mind, this can be on paper if you're someone who loves to scribble things down, etc. The second thing is on something that I've always adopted is do things right the first time. And this has always helped me in decomplicate, like you were saying, right? Everything sounds complicated. Whenever I've done something for the first time, I've given it my 150%, right? The second time I've done it, it has become that much more easier because the first time I gave it 100%, right? So if you approach everything that you do for the first time and do it really well at that time during your formative years, later on, it will become less and less complicated and you can really go far. And the third thing I want to say for a student is that, always carry that corporate law book in your hand. I remember that, I would not step out of my house on a training day without the Bear Act. And by the end of that training period, that Bear Act was so in such a bad shape that you couldn't even hand it down to someone else, right? And even today, not a day goes by when something is presented that don't go and look back at the section. And it's amazing. Every time you have a new situation, you look at the same section, you think, oh, maybe there's a different interpretation here, right? So don't let go of that one book in your hand, which you will diligently refer. And one book is just an example. It can be the law that you're dealing with. I think a combination of these three will really help a student, Alok.
Just 1 second. So students, at least we had to carry the Bear Act. Now you have the MCA ebook on the Companies Act with the latest amendments. So it's on your phone itself. Yes. Yes,
Yeah,
Vinay, please go ahead.
Absolutely. I would say 3 qualities of a good company secretary that I feel, and there will be several more, and I'm just touching only upon the ones that I think are relevant. One is ethics and integrity. I think that goes without saying that, by nature, corporates look at you as someone who has high value systems, who will keep the organization on the right track. That is to say that not all are aware of what the law is, and people want to run the business, and that's natural, right? But in the course of running the business, if something is not to be done in a particular way, the professional has to come and say what is the right way, right? And it's not just enough to say this is the wrong way. It is important to say this is the right way, right? A solution to enable the business, right? I think that it takes a lot of personal characteristic of ethics and values and integrity, and that is something that's a given for all professionals, and that's something that also transcends your personal life. And that is a hallmark of a company secretary, according to me. The second point is on the domain expertise, Alok. I think you touched upon it earlier. The need to reskill, upskill, the ability to learn, unlearn, and relearn. The pace at which regulations are changing, the pace at which events are happening in the world, and regulators are reacting to make changes in law to keep up with those events. Is increasingly becoming a daily affair. So, a professional has to be a subject matter expert he or she has to take that interest to constantly update, to constantly be inquisitive. For example, there is a case law happening somewhere in the other part of the world. Take an interest and read. Maybe that gives you some aspect of principle that you were not aware of. Read an article, let's say, from some professor in a foreign university who has analyzed, let's say, principles of governance, right? So that inquisitive mindset will go a long way in keeping you an SME or a domain expert, and that's really critical. Without that, a company secretary will not be able to survive. And the last skill I would say is stakeholder management. A CS is sort of at the center of dealing with multiple stakeholders. So you have your board and directors on the one hand, you have your internal management on the other hand, you have a set of auditors on the outside, you have your investors or shareholders, you have regulators, and several more, right? Each one of them have a different perspective on what governance is, what corporate law is. But the underlying law is the same, right? No matter how someone looks at it. So how do you manage the stakeholder objectives, the stakeholder expectations, and ensure that the company is on the right track? I think that is something that comes over time, but it is a key skill for a CS to have.
Yeah, so can you share at least one or two anecdotes with respect to the key skills to be successful as a company secretary from your work experience? Would you like to share one or two anecdotes of how you remember and how these skills were used?
Yeah, sure. So I think it always, I mean, I would, rather than sharing a specific experience, I would share one particular line of thought.
Yes.
Whenever you interact, let's say, with board members or independent directors, they are all very seasoned and come from very different and rich experience. They have seen 10 companies, they have seen a lot of business matters in their life, etc. Something that has always helped me in interaction with such senior professionals is to keep yourself updated, not only of the law, but what's happening around. The case laws, the current affairs. Let's say, the independent director is on the board of another company, and that company has gone through a similar matter. Let's say you have a very tricky situation in related party transactions, right? But a similar matter has happened in another company where the independent director is a director of, and you have gone and checked that. Maybe you've seen the public information, maybe you've spoken to that company secretary, etc. You do your homework, and when you discuss with the independent director, you actually present the full picture. And there is a lot of appreciation for that. So I mean, this is one area where your ability to constantly update comes into the picture, because you become that much more a rounded professional.
Okay, great. So what do you think students should work on? What are the kind of soft skills they should work on? Of course, as we discussed multiple times during this interview and discussion, that your core technical skills is a given and that is required. Without that, you can't do much. But apart from this, what are the other soft skills? Again, I ask this with the background because initially you have spent quite a time in teaching and in presentations and public speaking. So with that angle, I'm asking this question of soft skills.
Sure, Alok. I think it's really important for CS professionals to have soft skills. And here's what I think are the top 2-3 soft skills that a CS professional should have. The first and foremost, I think, is good communication. And when I say communication, I mean both oral communication and written communication. I cannot overemphasize this enough. This one quality alone will be a strategic differentiator for you. You may be really good at your domain, you may be really good at laws, but if you're not good at communication, you will miss an edge in the market. Oral communication is something that is absolutely essential. Your ability to simplify the law for someone who does not understand the law. I think that I would put it that way. You are the expert when you go out in the market and work in a company. You're the one who's supposed to explain, let's say, to a business person who does not know anything about law as to what the law is. So your ability to understand the law, communicate the law in the simplest fashion, and make it a decision-making point. That is something that leads to ultimately a decision on what is to be done to comply with the law. So oral communication is very important. I would say even more important is our written communication, because We have seen enough and more number of times that the proof of pudding is actually in the documentary evidence, right? In every stage of judicial challenge, for example, that's the simplest example I can take. Decisions are made based on the evidence that you produce. So, for example, how well do you write something as simple as the minutes of a board meeting? How well do you write resolutions? How well do you prepare your annual reports and disclosures? Written communication is so important, and it just goes beyond having a good vocabulary. It goes to the heart of understanding the matter, understanding who your audience are, presenting something in the simplest manner, but at the same time being legally compliant. So I would say written and oral communication skills is really important, and that's something we should constantly work on. I am doing it even today. I'll do it for the rest of my career, is to work on my communication skills. Second point I would say is to develop a solution-oriented mindset. And I think that's one important soft skill that a CS professional should have. It is one thing to know the law and what can't be done, but what companies are looking for is someone who can enable running the business in a compliant manner. So it's not enough to say that, for example, something cannot be done, it is prohibited under law, but to come up with a solution on how something can be done in a compliant manner, right? And that takes some amount of effort and involvement, a solution-oriented mindset. That's a good soft skill to have. And the last one I will say is on networking, Alok. I think all of us should do it. I personally didn't do it the first 3 years of my CS life when I was doing my BCom, because I was completely oblivious to what was happening in the CS world. But after that, like you said, I really did make an effort to network, to connect with CS professionals, to go out and do public speaking, to teach, to interact with fellow students, fellow professionals, to interact with seniors, etc. Our profession is a niche skill, where people work on the basis of exchanging best practices, because the laws sometimes are gray, and you need to know what others are doing. You need to know what the good practices are. So a network like this helps a lot, and I have greatly benefited from networking. So these are my top 3 skills, soft skills, Alok.
Yeah, so I think we got all that. I'll continue. Okay. So Vinay has been telling us about the soft skills, and he touched upon networking. And what was interesting is he told, of course, oral communication is required, and again, that is given, but written communication is something which every person has to work on, especially a company secretary, because end of the day, you're drafting, whether it's a simple email, whether it is a notice for a meeting, whether it is a shareholders agreement, any document, end of the day, whatever you understand, you're putting it down on paper, and written communication skills is important. And other thing which Vinay shared is that how do you simplify the law, make the law simple for people who are not necessarily from a law background, but for business decisions, the legal understanding is important. And I think these soft skills and other skills which he mentioned was very interesting.